So, okay, today it will be mainly, only in fact, discrete trees, but in the next lectures I will talk a little bit about continuous trees, perhaps more complicated objects. Maybe I should immediately give a reference. Much of what I'm going to say in this course can be found in a kind of survey I wrote, which is called Random Trees and Applications. And it was published in the Probability Survey, I think in 2005. Okay. And so it's very easy to find. You just type my name and the title and the journal on Google, and you immediately get the paper. It's free, of course. And it's only chapters 1 and 2, of course, that I will be talking about in these lectures. So maybe later I will do certain things which are not in this survey, but at least for today, certainly everything is there. Okay. Okay. So just start with a brief introduction, just some motivation. So why are we interested in random trees? Well, in fact, they arise in many different areas of probability or mathematics or physics and so on. So of course, in probability theory, in particular in the study of branching processes, which you have probably already seen, but in also other models, like, for instance, fragmentation processes or coalescent processes. So in all these models, you have really underlying trees which are very important. More generally, in all sorts of population models, you immediately find trees. Okay? So it's something very basic, if you want, in many parts of probability theory. But of course, random trees are also of interest in combinatorics. Okay, so trees basically are key objects in combinatorics, as well as graphs. That are special cases of graphs. And well, you heard in the lectures by Nicolas Curien also about planar maps. And in fact, planar maps, I don't think that Nicolas spoke much about that, but it's a very important idea in the study of planar maps that it can be coded by trees. So there is a kind of very close relation between trees and planar maps. And if you look at a random planar map, well, you get random trees, and okay, this is very important. Okay? But of course, okay, trees also occur in many models of statistical physics. Maybe I will not list of all of them, but for instance, if you study percolation in high dimensions, one can prove in a very precise way that the clusters look like trees in some sense. Okay, so I'm not going to say much about that, but trees also occur in that context. And well, of course, trees are important also in mathematical biology. But people study, for instance, I'm going to write it properly, phylogenetic trees. And also this coalescent theory is quite important in models of mathematical genetics, in fact. So maybe I should have said mathematical genetics here, better than biology. Okay, coalescent and so on. And maybe finally I can also mention, this is not an exhaustive list, but I can also mention computer science. In fact, trees have been studied first by computer scientists. Some of the results I'm going to mention were proved by computer scientists, because trees are related to, well, to theoretical computer science, where you study problems of, for instance, data allocation. Okay. How to allocate the data in a computer and so on. Okay. Okay, so this was just a brief motivation. What I'm going to explain in these lectures, what I want to do primarily well, let's say main goal, explain why large discrete trees can be approximated in some sense, are close to certain continuous models, to these continuous trees. So all this will be random. And these continuous random trees, well, I will give the definition later, but in some sense they are coded by Brownian motion. Okay. I will explain what this means, of course. But in some sense, they are objects that one can study in a very precise way, using everything that is known about Brownian motion. Okay, so this will be related, of course, to things that you already know about Brownian motion. Okay. So this general goal, if you want, it's quite similar to something you have probably seen already. The fact that if you look at paths of random walk, that is point and simple random walk in ZD, and so on, a long simple random walk can be approximated by a Brownian motion. It's close to a Brownian motion. Okay? And this is something very basic in probability theory. Okay? And it's very useful if you want to understand how a long random walk behaves. If you know what a Brownian motion does, you will have information on the random walk. Okay? And of course, also, Brownian motion is interesting in its own, and it's nice to have properties of all sorts of properties of Brownian motion to do stochastic calculus and so on. Here, it's a bit similar because primarily you are interested in discrete objects, large discrete objects. Well, there is a kind of continuous model, this continuous random tree, that helps you to understand the large discrete objects. Okay? So this is a bit of the philosophy of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, that's all for the introduction. So let me start with the first section. I'll speak about discrete trees and their codings. So in this section, there will be no probability. Okay? It's basically combinatorics and simple combinatorics. It's not difficult. So do not hesitate. It should be, I think, it should be relatively easy, I think. Well, of course, there are some maybe a little more delicate arguments from time to time, but essentially it's very elementary. So if you have questions, do not hesitate. Okay, so first thing, what is a tree? For the moment, a discrete tree. Okay. Well, in fact, there are several possible definitions which are non-equivalent. So there is not just one definition of what is a discrete tree. Here, I will look at one particular definition, but later I will explain that the results we obtain with this definition can be extended to other definitions. Okay? But here, I will consider what people call plane trees. And a plane tree is the same, if you want, so as a rooted ordered tree. But often in combinatorics, people like to call this a plane tree, for reasons I will explain. Okay? So what is an object like this? Well, I will take a very simple example. So my favorite example of a tree in this lecture will be this one. Okay. And maybe one more here. Okay, that's enough. So you should imagine this as a kind of a genealogical tree for a population. So at the bottom here, I have an ancestor, which I will denote by typically by the symbol empty set. Okay, so the root of my tree, if you want here. And this ancestor has a certain number of children. And typically, I'm going to write 1, 2, 3 for the children. Say, for instance, here, 1 will have also 2 children. I will write for them 1, 1, and 1, 2. It's not 11 here. It's really the sequence 1, then 1. And okay, here 1, 2 has 1 child, 1, 2, 1. 3 has 1 child, I call it 1, 2, 1. Okay, so this is an example of a plane tree. So it's rooted, obviously I have my root here. It's ordered precisely because in the way I write things, I have an order on the children of every individual. So 1 is the first child of the root, 2 is the second child, 3, 1, 1 is the first child of 1, and so on. Okay? Another way of saying it is that the tree is represented in the plane like this, and when I represent it in the plane, I put the children of an individual in their order from left to right. Okay? So I have the plane embedding, of course, which corresponds, which is consistent with the ordering on the tree. Okay. So one way of defining the tree will be just to say that it is the collection of all its vertices, and each vertex corresponds to a finite sequence of integers, including the empty sequence which is here. And so I can write the tree in this way. Okay, 3, 1, 1, 2, 1. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit more formal. Okay, I hope I do not annoy you too much with the definitions. But it's important to be formal in the beginning so that everything I'm going to say later will make sense. So I will set script capital U. This will be the union from n equals 0 to infinity of capital N to the power n. So this will be the possible labels, if you want, of vertices in my trees. And so capital N here, I'm using the American convention. It's not the French convention. It's a set of positive integers, okay? I don't put 0 in it. And of course, I have n to the power 0, and to the power 0 is consists just of the empty sequence, empty set, okay? So I will define a tree as a subset of this set of labels. So maybe before I do that, I already introduced one notation. If U belongs to one of these sets here, say capital N to the power little n, I will write modulus absolute value of U, if you want, equal n. This is the generation of U. Okay? So here's my definition of a tree. A tree 2 is a finite subset. So finite will be important. I'm not going to consider infinite trees here of U. And with a certain number of properties. Well, I always require that the ancestor is in the tree. Then if I have an element of the tree, so an element of the tree is a finite sequence I1, In of positive integers, possibly the empty sequence, but here I require it's not the empty sequence, so I require that n is at least 1. Then what I say that the parent of U, so the parent of U is just what I get if I just drop the last term in the sequence, is also in the tree. So I should say here that U is in the tree. So just an individual in the tree, its parent is also in the tree. Okay? And last property, if I have again U equals I1, In, an element of the tree, then there exists an integers which I denote by K2 of U, which can be 0, which is a non-negative integer, such that, well, if I look at the sequence I1, In, and I add J at the end, this belongs to the tree if and only if J is between 1 and K2 of U. Okay? So, of course, the interpretation is obvious. K2 of U is the number of children of u into. Okay. Okay, so they are very easy to understand definitions, but I'm going to use this notation many times in the sequel. Okay, so this is a notion of a tree. So here I should have said a plane tree, but of course I will speak only about plane trees, so I just say trees. Okay, so perhaps I have to define also a notation. When I have a tree like this, I can consider, well, its size. So it will be, well, I could look at the number of vertices. So it's the cardinality of T. But you can also look at something slightly different, which I denote in this way, modulus of tau, if you want. This is the number of edges. If you use a tree as a graph. And of course, it's very easy to see that the cardinality, the number of vertices, is the same as the number of edges plus 1. Okay. So I'm a little bit sorry because I will have two notations here, cardinality and number of edges. Well, it's almost the same, of course, but it will be convenient for me to have both, in fact. So, I could have done everything with only one notation, but maybe I will use both. Okay. Okay, so what are we going to do with these trees? Essentially, what we want to do, we want to take a very large tree like that, chosen at random, and to understand how it looks like. What can you say about its properties? Okay, and for that, well, it's not so easy to deal with trees. Well, we will later see ways of dealing with asymptotics for trees themselves, but it will be easier to associate with a tree a coding function. Okay, so maybe I can just tip this picture. So I'm going to explain first how you can code trees by functions. Okay, so in some sense, the idea is that if you can establish bijection between trees and certain functions, discrete functions, while studying the tree will be the same as studying the associated function, and sometimes it's easier to understand, for instance, limit theorems for these functions than for the trees. Okay, so the first one, which is not the most important one in these lectures, but I want to mention it because it is very easy to understand. The first coding function is a so-called contour function of the tree. Okay, so I always consider this tree here, and what you do for coding for the contour function, you just imagine that your tree is drawn in the plane like this. Okay, I repeat the children listed from left to right in the order I have on the tree. And you imagine that you are going to explore the tree like this. Okay, you move around the tree. Okay. That one. And what you are going to record, well, the distance from the root when you do this evolution. Okay, so for instance, for this tree here, essentially what you do, let's say you have, say, 1, 2, 3 here. So you start from the bottom here, distance 0. You go up twice, then you go down, you go up twice again, and okay, you go back here, something like this. Okay. So that's the contour function, and essentially, well, it's defined as a certain interval here. Well, how long does it take to explore all the trees? Well, you see that you cross each edge twice, once upwards and once downwards. And so essentially, the time you need to fully explore the tree is twice the number of edges. Okay, so this is twice the size of the tree. Okay. Okay, I don't say much more about that. Maybe later we will mention this, but this will not be so important today. I turn to another one, which will be more important. This is the so-called height function. Okay, so to define the height function, I will need to list the vertices of the tree. And I'm going to list them in a particular order, which is the lexicographical order. Okay? So I write 2 equals U0, U1, UP. So P here is the size of tau. So you have here P plus 1 vertices, you see. But here I write this, that's very important, listed in lexicographical order. Okay, so for instance, in the case of this tree here, what is the lexicographical order? Well, you have, of course, the first one is the empty sequence. Then you have 1, you have 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Then you have 2, 3, 3. Okay, just if you want the order of the dictionary, okay, on a finite sequence of positive integers. Okay, so U0 will be always the empty set. U1 will be always 1, but then it depends here. U2 is 1, 1, and so on. Okay. Definition. The height function of tau, denoted by h2 of I. So this will be defined for I between 0 and modulus of tau. Is defined by h2 of I, but it's just the generation of the vertex ui in this enumeration. Okay? So maybe I can do the picture. Okay, we can erase that. We can forget about the contour function. It's not going to be so useful for the moment. Okay, so you take these trees, and what do we do? Okay, so as I told you, this is U0, this is U1, this is U2, etc. This is U3, for instance. Okay, and so again, we start from U0, which is the ancestor, which are at generation 0. So we start from 0 always. Then here I jump to generation 1. Okay, and then to generation 2 for U2. Then the third one, U3 here, is at the same generation. Then this is U4. Go here. And then the next one is this one. Okay, so you go down here. You stay at the same generation here. You come here, and now it's finished. Okay, so this time here is 1. This time here is the number of edges of the tree. Okay. Okay. So this is, if you want, the height function. Okay. Okay. So this is, it's very simple to define, and something you can check on this. So this is for I with these properties. If you know the height function, you can recover the tree. Remark. Can recover tau from h tau. So this is really a coding in the sense that you have a certain bijection between discrete trees and functions of this type. I don't say exactly which properties they satisfy, but essentially, well, the important thing is that if you know this function, you can redraw the tree. Okay, that's very, very easy to check. I don't give the details. Okay. So in some sense, it's a coding of the tree. It was also true for the contour function I said before. It's easier to see from the contour function, but from that also it's quite easy to see. Okay, so this height function, in some sense, it gives you, well, only information about the tree, but some of this information is very easy to recover from the function. For instance, if you are interested in the height of the tree, the height is the maximal generation, it's the same as the maximum of the height function. Okay? So, for instance, if you understand well the height function, well, you have immediately useful information about the tree. Okay, so let me continue. The third coding I want to discuss is the so-called Lukasiewicz path. So again, I list the elements of my tree in lexicographical order. Okay. Exactly what I was doing here. And okay, I can immediately give the definition. Well, Lukasiewicz is too long to write, so I will write the Lukasiewicz path of tau is a discrete function so I call it this time x2 of I. This is for I between 0 and also it's not theta, it's tau, sorry. So here it was between 0 and the size of tau. Here it's between 0 and the size of tau plus 1, just a minor difference. Defined by, so I will say that x2 of j is equal to the sum from I equals 0 to j minus 1. So this is the number of children of the vertex ui in the tree. Remember the definition. Minus 1. Okay, so this is, as I said before, this makes sense. You can immediately see that this makes sense for j between 0 and this quantity, cardinality. Okay. Because essentially you need a ui to be defined up to I equals j minus 1. And this will be okay as long as j is smaller than this quantity. Okay? Okay, so this looks like a bit strange definition, but okay, we'll see later why this is useful. Okay? So maybe I can just give an example here. So again, with the same tree. So what do we get? Okay, so we always start from 0. If I take j equals 0, this sum is empty. Okay, so by convention, I have 0 here at the beginning. At the first step, what we do, we add the number of children of u0, which is the root, minus 1. Okay, so the number of children of the root here is 3. Minus 1, it makes 2. So at the first step, we jump to 2. Okay? Okay? Then at the next step, so at the next step, we arrive at this vertex here. We remember we list them in lexicographical order. So we consider this vertex here. We add the number of its children, which is 2 minus 1. Okay, so this means that we add 1, right here. At the next step, well, we go to this vertex, u2. This one it has no child. Okay, so we add 0 minus 1, so this means that we subtract 1. Okay. Okay. And then we go to this one, which has one child. At that time, we add 0. Go to this one, which has 0 child, so we go down minus 1. We go to this one, which has no child, minus 1. So this one has one child, we stay at the same level. Okay. And this one has no child, we go down. Okay, and that's finished. Okay, you can check that the time at which we finish, of course, is this quantity, which is the same as the cardinality of tau. Okay, so we have a function of this type, and well, in that example, you see some properties. For instance, you see the fact that you finish at minus 1, the path, and that you remain positive or non-negative before the final time. Okay, so this is not, of course, particular to that example. This is true in general. Properties. Well, you have the fact that x2 of I is non-negative for I between 0 and the size of 2. And on the other hand, the final point of the path is equal to -1. Okay? So you stay non-negative for this, and just at the very end, you jump to -1. Okay? So how do you prove that? So we have time? Yeah. Well, I will at least prove A. Well, you just rewrite. So suppose that J is between 0 and 2. You just rewrite this definition. So this is a sum from I equals 0 to J minus 1 of K tau of J. Sorry, there's no absolute value. And okay, I prefer to write it this way, minus, so how many terms you have? You have J terms, minus J. So it should be I here, sorry. Minus J, okay? And now, what can you say? Well, essentially, this sum here, well, what is it? It is the total number of children of the individuals U1, U0, U1, Uj minus 1. And now, you use something which I'm going to use several times again later. The fact that in this lexicographical ordering, you always visit an individual before its descendants, before its children, and before all its descendants. Okay, because it's the way the lexicographical ordering is done. Okay, the descendants of 1 are the elements of the tree which start with 1. Okay, okay. The lexicographical ordering tells you that 1 comes before all these. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So, okay, so what I'm saying is that among these children, I certainly have all the vertices U1, U2, Uj. Okay? Because the parent of any of these vertex must be one vertex which is before in lexicographical order, strictly before, so it has to be one of these. Okay. It's completely trivial in that case. Okay? It's trivial, but you can do it because J is at least at most this quantity, okay? Because Uj has to make sense, okay? Okay. So you have at least J vertices, so this total number is greater than or equal to J, and so this is greater than 0, okay? So that's the proof of the first part. So I don't prove the second part, it's exactly the same kind of arguments, okay? You just, I leave B as an exercise, it's very easy. Okay, so now to finish the first part of the lecture, to finish this combinatorics part, I will explain that the Lukasiewicz path is also a way of coding the tree. Okay, so the way I will do it, I will show that, in fact, if you know the Lukasiewicz path, you can recover the height function. Okay, so maybe I can erase that. We saw before that if you know the height function, we can recover the tree. I will now show you that if you know this path, you can recover the height function. Okay. So this is a lemma. Again, it's a lemma of combinatorics if you want, but that's going to be very useful. The Lukasiewicz path is related to the height function by the formula in fact, I will express the height function in terms of the Lukasiewicz path. So h2 of I. So this will be, well, maybe I will put h2 of j. This is the cardinality of the set of indices I between 0 and j minus 1. Maybe I should have put that further. Which have the following properties: that x2 of I is equal to the minimum of x2 of L for L between I and J. Okay, so this is what I was saying. You have a formula. Well, not very nice formula, but still you have a formula that tells you, if you know the Lukasiewicz path, this x2 here, you can recover the height function. Okay, we can check this formula works on this example. So look at this example here and take, for instance, well, this, I will take this value of j, okay, for instance. Okay, so j is 1, 2, 3, 4. J equals 4. Okay, so it's a vertex u4 which is here, which is at generation 3. Okay, so how do we see on this picture that uj has generation 3? Well, I apply the formula which is here. I look at indices smaller than j, such that the Lukasiewicz at this time, at time I, is equal to the minimum at its value between I and j. Okay, so in this example here, this is going to work, for instance, for this time here, for this one, and of course also it always works for this one also. Okay, because you see, if you look, for instance, at the value here at this time here, the value of the Lukasiewicz path is equal to 2, and 2 is also the minimum that you get between this time and j. The same for this one and so on. Okay, so you apply the formula and you recover the fact that here h2 of 4 is equal to 3, because you have 3 times here. Okay, and you can check that it works for. So it's proof by example. Well, I still have time to give you the full proof. Too bad. Okay, so let's prove this. It's not at all difficult, okay? I'm giving you the full details because that's going to be, when we consider random trees later, that's going to be very important, this formula. But it's not at all difficult. Okay, so h2 of j, well, it's the generation of uj. So you can also say that h2 of j is the cardinality of the set of I between 0 and j minus 1, such that ui is an ancestor of uj. Okay, so that's very easy to see because it's just the fact that the generation of an individual is just the number of its ancestors. Okay, strict ancestors. Yeah? I don't count the individual himself. Okay, and I told you before that ancestors are visited before an individual in lexicographical order. So I need only look at the I which are smaller than j here to get all the ancestors. Okay, so this equality is something trivial. So we need to check that if I is smaller than j, let's say smaller than, doesn't matter here. Okay, this property that ui is an ancestor of uj is equivalent to the property which is here. Okay, so I rewrite the property. x2 of I equals minimum of x2 of L for I between L and J. Okay, so if we know that, then it's finished because what we count here is exactly the ancestors, the strict ancestors of uj, and well, the number of these ancestors is the same as the generation. Okay. Okay, so how do we see that? Okay, so let me first prove the implication from the left to the right. So I suppose that ui ancestor of uj. And then, okay, I will just pick one L between I and j. And I will look at the difference x2 of L minus x2 of I. Okay, I want to verify that this difference is non-negative. Okay. Okay, so how is the x2 of L defined? It's here. Okay, you just make the difference. And well, here you have a sum up to j minus 1. So if I do this for j equals L, I have a sum up to L minus 1. So I will get something, so maybe probably it's from I, sorry. Sum from m equals I to L minus 1 of x2 of m. And I have the terms minus 1. Okay, the term minus 1 will give me something like L minus m. Okay. I can write it this way. Okay, this is just applying the definition which is here. Okay. And sorry? Ah, it should be case. Thank you very much. Okay. And now it's very similar to the arguments I did here. Well, what do I have here? This is the total number of children of ui up to ul minus 1. Okay, so now an observation I should have made before. I can make it now. So what happened in the lexicographical order when you visit the vertex ui, immediately after you are going to visit all its descendants. Okay, so suppose that ui is here. Okay, let me check. Imagine that this is your tree. Okay, so suppose this is ui, and maybe here you have the first vertex which is not a descendant of ui after ui. But because of lexicographical ordering, what you are going to do, you are going to visit all these vertices first before you visit a vertex which is not a descendant of ui. Okay, so here I've assumed that ui is an ancestor of uj, so uj is somewhere here. Okay, L is between I and j. Okay, so L must also be somewhere here a descendant of ui. Okay, so automatically you have this picture. Okay. Now what I'm saying is that among these children, you automatically have all vertices ui plus 1, ui plus 2, ul. Okay? Because all these vertices are going to be, again, descendants of ui. And, okay, so their parent will be somewhere here in this subtree before ul. And so it has to be one of ul minus 1. Okay? So it's just the same argument as before. Okay? Okay. So you have at least all these vertices. You may have more, in fact, okay? But you have at least all these vertices. And here you have L minus I. So it was L minus I here, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, because I had minus 1, so I had L minus I terms, sorry. So here I have at least L minus I vertices. So this quantity here is greater than or equal to L minus I, so the difference is non-negative. Okay, so this is the thing I wanted to show. I wanted to show to you that if I take L between I and J, all these quantities here are greater than this one. Okay, okay, now the converse. Can you erase that? So in the other direction, so I'm going to, if you want to argue by contradiction, I will assume that Ui is not an ancestor of Uj.
But you still need to show the minimum as tau I.
Sorry?
You only show as tau L is greater than I, but you still need to show the minimum equals.
Yeah, but this is true for any L between I and J. So the minimum is also greater than x of I.
Yeah, but you need to show the minimum equals.
Oh yeah, but I have L equal I in this minimum. Yeah. Sorry, I could have mentioned that. Yeah, yeah, it's equal. It's obviously, this is always true, of course. Okay, so in the other direction, I will assume that suppose Ui not an ancestor of Uj, and I will prove that then this cannot be true. Okay, so I use the same idea. So I think that. So remember that J is greater than I, saying that Ui is not an ancestor of Uj. Well, it's saying that J is at least equal to the first index. I call this L0. Let L0 first index L greater than I, such that UL is not an ancestor of UI, is not an ancestor of UL. Okay? Okay, so if I assume that UI is not an ancestor of Uj, this means that Uj is somewhere here. Okay? So then automatically J is greater than L0. Okay? Because before L0, okay, precisely I'm visiting the descendants of UI. Okay, okay, so I'm just going to say that the minimum of x2 of L, so for L between I and J, is at least is greater than or equal to, I take one particular value, I take L equals L this L0 here. Okay, because L0 is smaller than J. Okay? Okay, and now I'm going to show you that the difference, in fact, this x2 of L0 is strictly smaller than x2 of I. Okay, so I just look at same argument, x2 of L0 minus x2 of I. I write this as the same argument I was doing there. M equals I to L0 minus 1 of K2 of M minus L0 minus I. The same equality as there. And now, same thing, this is the total number of children of the vertices. It should be UM here, sorry. I wrote it properly. Oh yeah, I made the mistake several times, sorry for that. Total number of children of UI plus 1 up to U L0 minus 1. And then what I say that, well, all these children, all these individuals, by definition, they are descendants of UI, okay, the children. And because they are children of descendants of UI, well, UI is not in the list, okay. So these children, in fact, this is the same as the set UI plus 1, UI plus 2, UL0 minus 1. Okay. Because these individuals, they are all the descendants of UI, except UI, of course, because you take only children. Okay. But you have nothing else, because these are children of individuals which are descendants of UI, so they are themselves descendants of UI, where they are here in the tree. Okay, these are all the individuals there, except for this one. Okay. And so, how many do you get here? You get L0, you get L0 minus I minus 1. So this total number is equal to L0 minus I minus 1. And so, because you subtract L0 minus I, all this is going to be equal to minus 1. Okay? So this is telling you that if you want x2 of L0, okay, is strictly small. I think I did it the wrong way here. Sorry. It was like this, sorry. X2 of L0 is strictly less than X2 of I. Okay? So this is telling you that you cannot have equality here. Okay? So I assume that this was not true. I proved to you that this equality fails. Okay? So this completes the proof of the lemma. It's very elementary, but when you do it on the blackboard, you get mixed a little bit. But I think I did it almost correctly here. Okay, it's time for the break. So we have the break now. And okay, these were all combinatorics, no probability at all. But after the break, we will apply all these to random trees. Maybe this will be more interesting for you. So in the second part of the lecture today, I'm going to talk about Galton-Watson trees. So the idea of Galton-Watson trees is very simple. You just imagine that each individual has, independently of the others, a random number of children. Distributed according to mean, to a certain probability distribution, which I call mu, and this is usually called the Hausstring distribution. So you want to define a tree where you have this property. So it looks more or less obvious how to do it, but it's not completely easy, so one has to do something which I will explain now. But before that, I will introduce my assumptions on mu. So mu is a probability distribution on the set of non-negative integers. And so the basic assumption is the fact that mu has mean less than or equal to 1. So sum of k mu of k is less than or equal to 1. So this corresponds to critical or subcritical case. Okay, critical case is when you have equality here. The mean of mu is exactly equal to 1. Okay? And I need an extra assumption, but really this is only to avoid a trivial case. I assume that mu is not the direct measure at 1. Okay, just because I don't want to consider that case. Okay, so remember the notation I introduced before. I set script capital U, which was the union from n equals 0 to infinity of capital N to the power n, the set of possible individuals, if you want, in my tree. And I introduce a collection indexed by this set, script capital U, of random variables, which are distributed according to mu and independent. Okay? So these are independent, identically distributed with distribution mu. Okay? So that's going to represent, if you want, the number of children of U, well, assuming that U is in the tree I'm going to construct, of course. Okay? So maybe we can state a proposition. So I will set theta. This is the set of all u belonging in the index set script capital U. So I will write them u equals I1, I2, In. Okay. We satisfy the following property, such that I will require that Ij is less than k I1, I2, Ij minus 1. This for all j between 1 and n. Okay? So if you want what I'm saying, for instance, for j equals n, I'm saying here that In, okay, so In should be the rank of U among the children of its parent. And I assume that this rank is smaller than what I want to be the number of children of its parent. Okay. Okay. Well, if U is the empty sequence, n equals 0, this condition is empty. It's always satisfied. Okay. Then theta should write almost surely a tree. And with the number of children of a vertex U in theta will be equal to ku. This will be true for every U belonging to theta. Furthermore, if I'm going to count here the number of individuals of theta at each generation, so I look at the cardinality of the set U in theta such that U at generation n, then as a process in n, this is a Galton-Watson branching process with offspring distribution mu, and started, that's obvious, at 1. Okay? Okay. Yeah, I assume you've already seen Galton-Watson branching processes. Anyhow, I will record the definition in the proof. Okay, so this is not at all a difficult result. Essentially, proof. Theta satisfies all the properties of a tree. You just have to come back to the properties you require from a tree. I already told you that the ancestor is in theta, that's obvious. And then you will check that you will have the properties with this equality here, just by definition. Okay, it's really the way you define it. Mm-hmm. And the only thing which is not completely trivial is the fact that theta is a finite. Okay, so theta satisfies all properties of the definition of trees, except possibly theta finite. Okay? And in fact, at this point, I do not use here the assumption on mu, but of course I will use it to verify that theta is finite. Okay? So to verify that theta is finite, well, I'm going to prove the second part of the proposition, this part here. So I'm going to look at this process Zn. So what is Zn plus 1 of theta? But by construction, you can get it in the following way. It's the sum over all u belonging to theta at generation n. So maybe I should write it differently. Sum over all u at generation n of the indicator function that u is in theta times ku. Okay? Just think of the way theta is defined, and Ku represent precisely the number of children of U. So I sum over all individuals at generation n, their number of children. This gives me the number of individuals at generation n plus 1. It just follows from the definition. Okay? Okay, and of course, if I want, I can also write the n of theta as a similar sum, but I just put the indicator that U is in theta. Okay, by definition. Okay, so now the idea is that basically, if I look at these are random variables now because my theta is random, but these random indicators, they are measurable with respect to the sigma field. So I use this notation sigma, etc., for the sigma field generated by random variables. Okay? So these are measurable with respect to the random variables kv with generation strictly less than n. Okay? Okay? Just because if you have an individual at generation n, just look at the definition which is here. To see if it's in the tree, you just need to know the kv for generation of v strictly less than n. Okay? Okay, so all these random variables will be independent of these ones here, okay? Because these ones are for u at generation n, and I assume that they are all independent. Okay? So using this property, you see that conditionally on, say, z0, maybe I should write z0 of theta, z1 of theta, zn of theta. So all these random variables are measurable with respect to this. Okay? What is the distribution of zn plus 1? Well, it's a sum of a certain number, and the number is zn of theta, of random variables distributed according to mu. Okay? So vn plus 1 of theta has the same distribution as a sum from j equals 1 to zn of theta of psi j being IID with distribution mu. Okay? Just follows from the way things are writing. If you condition with respect, well, in fact, you can condition on more than this. You can condition on all this sigma field. Then you know this indicator function, and you have a sum of exactly that number of independent random variables distributed according to mu. Okay? So this is just the definition of a Galton-Watson branching process. Okay? Okay, the definition of a Galton-Watson process is that if you know the process up to time n, well, the value at time n plus 1, well, you will get the distribution of the sum of the children of the individuals at time n, and this is the sum that you get here. Okay, so now, once I have that, I can use the properties which are there. These two properties, so this is a standard fact, which of course I do not prove here, which is not difficult to prove. They imply that the Galton-Watson branching process becomes extinct almost surely. Okay, so if you want almost surely, there exists an n0 such that for n greater than z0, the n is equal to 0. Okay, so this will imply that if you want my tree has finite height, above a certain generation, I have no vertices, and so it is finite. Okay. That's all I wanted to say for this. And so, definition, the tree theta which I have constructed, theta is called a Galton-Watson tree with offspring distribution mu. Okay, so in short, if you prefer, I will often write a mu Galton-Watson tree like this to make it shorter. Okay, so it's for the theta which I have constructed in this way. Here, if you want, I have an explicit construction, but or any tree having the same distribution, of course, will also be called a mu Galton-Watson tree. Okay, so what can we say about Galton-Watson trees? Well, you can compute their distribution, in fact. So maybe I will introduce a notation. I will use A for the set of all trees. So A for arbre in French, okay. But also because I don't want to use T, I have too many T's already. So A will be nice. Capital A with a double bar like this. So I will write theta mu be the distribution, or the law if you prefer, of theta. So it's a probability measure on the set of all trees. Okay, so we can in fact find an explicit expression for this theta mu. So if you want proposition, if I take a deterministic tree, so by convention here in this lecture at least, tau will represent a deterministic tree, a fixed tree, and theta is the random tree. Okay. So I take a deterministic tree, I look at theta mu of tau. So by definition, this is just the probability that theta is equal to tau. And I have an explicit formula, which is that this is the product of all u in tau of mu of k tau of u. So you remember, k tau of u is the number of children of u in tau. Proof. I'm not going to give the full proof, it's not difficult, but just a hint of the proof. You check that the event that my Galton-Wasson tree is equal to tau here is the same as the intersection of all u belonging to tau of the fact that the random variable ku is equal to k tau of u. Okay. So why is this true? Well, there is something which is almost obvious, which I've already written in the fact, is this inclusion, okay? Because if you know that theta equals tau, you use what I have written here. So if theta equals tau, well, k theta of u is equal to k tau of u, and this gives me this equality. I just use this, and this property, I did not say it before, but it's most obvious from the, well, what I've written above. Okay. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this inclusion is clear. Now you have to think a little bit about the other inclusion. It's not very difficult, but I will not do it. Essentially, if you have all these properties, they will imply that the 3 theta is indeed equal to 2. Okay, you can just verify it. Maybe I leave that as an exercise. Okay, so once you have this equality, well, you just take the probability. Okay, just. Here you have independent events because all the variables ku are independent. So the probability of the intersection is the product of the probability. Okay, and my assumption was that the ku have distribution mu, so this is the product of mu of k2 of u. Okay, so you get the desired formula. So the only thing I did not explain is why you have this inclusion, but you can think about it for a while and you will see it's not difficult. Otherwise, if you really are in trouble, you can look at the reference I gave at the beginning of the lecture. Okay, so we have this proposition. So we know, in fact, in some sense, we know very well the distribution of a Galton-Watson tree. So what I will do next, I will study this Lukasieving path I introduced before in the setting of deterministic trees. And we will see that it has a very simple structure if we look at a random tree. So this is what I'm going to explain now. You can erase that. So I'm going to call this a theorem. It's not such a difficult result, but it's surprisingly useful and powerful also. And so I think it deserves the name theorem. Okay. So the Lukasiewicz path of a mu Galton-Watson tree can be written as okay, I will write it in this way. S0, S1, S2, ST. Okay, where S is a random walk. So I should write Sn n positive is a random walk on Z with distribution, with jump distribution. So the jump distribution is not the measure mu, which is there, or this one, but it's very closely related to this mu. It's nu of k equals mu of k plus 1. This is for any k greater than minus 1. So my random walk are going to have jumps, negative jumps, but only of size minus 1. Okay, so what does it mean, a random walk? I should have said started from 0. So it means that Sn is equal, if you want, to xi1 plus xi2 plus xin, where the xi are iid with distribution mu. Okay, that's a definition of a random walk. You add independent random variables distributed according to mu. And I did not say what this capital T is. Capital T is the first time when the random walk hits minus 1. In fact, it's also the first time when the random walk becomes negative. You see that the random walk has, this is what I said before, has negative jumps only of size minus 1. So the first time it becomes negative, well, it will be first at minus 1. It cannot jump below minus 1. Okay, so why is this useful? Essentially, well, we saw in the first part of the lecture codings of trees by functions. Okay, so probably the most natural ones, perhaps the most useful ones for applications, are well, the one with the contour function or the one with the height function. Okay, these are more. The Lukasiewicz path is something more complicated. Okay, but now in the random setting, what we see is that the Lukasiewicz path has a very simple probabilistic structure. It's just a random walk, okay, stopped at the hitting time. Okay. So from the probabilistic point of view for a Galton-Watson tree, this is a nice object. And the height process of the tree is not so nice. Okay? You cannot describe it as easily as this. Okay? But we saw in the first part of the lecture that there is a formula. If you know the Lukasiewicz path, you can recover the height function. Okay? So basically, this is the idea. The Lukasiewicz path will be a technical tool. It has a very simple probabilistic structure. We recover from it the height function, which gives us information on the tree. Okay. So this is okay. The general idea. So we are going to prove this. And okay, I'm going to give the proof in details because that will be very useful. So I remind you of the definition of the Lukasiewicz path. So what I first need to do, okay, I take this tree theta. I need to enumerate the vertices of theta in lexicographical order. So I will write U0, U1, U side of theta, vertices of theta enumerated in lexicographical order. So beware that these are now random variables because theta is random, okay? But, well, the first one is not a random variable because it's always the ancestor, but the other ones are. And what was the definition of the Lukasiewicz path? So x theta of j was by definition the sum from I equals 0 to j minus 1 of the number of children in theta of ui minus 1. So this is for any j between 0 and theta plus 1. Okay, so this is really the definition. So of course I'm going to use now my construction of theta. Okay, so I've erased it, but you remember that the number of children of u in theta is equal to ku. So here I have kui. Okay. And of course, if you take any deterministic little u in script capital U, you know that ku minus 1 is distributed according to nu. Okay, nu is just the probability measure shifted by 1. So if I subtract 1 here, I get something distributed according to nu. Okay. So now you can say, well, the theorem is obvious. Because here, what do I get when j varies? I have a sum of random variables. In this case, they are all distributed according to mu and independent and so on. So clearly, what I get here is a random walk, because I just add independently this case. But in fact, there is a difficulty. Okay? There is a difficulty, which is the fact I'm not looking at the k at a deterministic index here. So this u is also random. Okay? So it's a little bit, if you remember, for instance, discrete martingales and so on, when you take the process at a stopping time and so on, it's not so clear what happens. Here it's a bit similar. You take this k at an index which is random, okay? And well, it's not so clear that you get things which are, again, distributed according to the same probability measure. Okay? So there is something to prove. Okay? Well, some people would say it's obvious from this, but I say it's better to give a proof. Okay, so let's do it. So to do it in a clean way, I want to define my random walk S. So essentially, in fact, you see the random walk appearing here, but only for values of j smaller than something, okay? So I want to define my random walk for all times. And that's just a technical point. I will extend the definition of ui to values of I greater than theta. You see that ui just defined here for I less than the size of theta by setting say u theta plus k. This will be, well, I will look at the vertex u theta, and I will add a certain number of ones here. K ones, if you want. Okay? So what does it mean? So you have your tree. Imagine your tree something like that, okay? So this vertex here, u theta, is the last one visited in lexicographical order. That's going to be this one. And now, what I do, I add ones, meaning that I add all this, I consider all vertices here, which are not in the tree, and so on. Okay, so for instance, this will be u theta plus k, okay, for k equals 3. Okay, just continue like this, okay. Okay, so these vertices are not in the tree, but I don't care. I just want to use them to define my random walk. Okay, so it's just a technical point. I could have done it in a different way, but I want to take here vertices which are not in the tree, in fact, and all different. Then define Sn. Well, I take the definition, I guess, from here. equals sum from I equals 0 to n minus 1 of KUI minus 1. And I define this for any non-negative n. Okay? Okay, so I needed to extend the definition of the UIs in order that this definition here makes sense. Here I need to have UI for any value of I. Okay? And of course, because of what I've written here, what I see is that the Lukasiewicz space is equal to the random walk if I take J between 0 and theta. Okay, this is just the definition. I have this property, and there are also other properties that I know. Properties that are true for any Lukasiewicz space, which I mentioned before, is the fact that it remains non-negative until the last step. Just, well, up to the last step, but not including the last step. So I also know that Sj is non-negative for, I can take plus 1 here, I think, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can plus 1 here. Sj is non-negative for j between 0 and side of theta, and S theta plus 1 is equal to minus 1. Okay? So I have automatically these properties because of what is above and because of properties I mentioned which are true for any Lukasiewicz space. Okay? Okay, so these two properties show you that this index is the first time when the random walk becomes negative or becomes equal to minus 1. Okay? So these two tell you that theta plus 1 is indeed the minimal value of n such that Sn equals minus 1. Okay, so what I defined as capital T here, definition. Okay? So you see you have everything you need. You know that if you want the length of the sequence of the Lukasiewicz space is indeed the healing time of minus 1 by capital S. You have S defined in this way. The only thing that is missing remains to prove that S is a random walk, in fact. Okay? So it remains to prove that S is a random walk with jump distribution mu. So how do we do that? Well, essentially what we need to verify is that all these variables are independent and have the right distribution. Okay? So this will be equivalent to saying that K0, Ku1, Ku2, and so on are RID with distribution mu. Okay? That you really add independent random variables or definition of the random walk. Okay? So I'm going to prove that. And again, the little small difficulty, if you want, is the fact that you look at the case at indices which are themselves random. Okay, so it's not so clear that this property. If I had deterministic, if this was deterministic, these two, then this would be completely trivial. Okay, it's just the definition that my case are IID mu, but here the indices are random. Okay, and the indices are random. They depend on the tree, and the tree itself depends on the capital case, and so well, it's not so clear. So how are we going to prove that? Well, I just come back to the definition of independence if you want. Okay, so maybe I can erase that now. So I'm going to take, if you want, test functions. I look at expected value of G0 of U0 times G1, or not U0, KU0, excuse me, G1 of KU1, and so on, GP of KUP. And I want to prove that this is a product of the expectation. Okay? Okay. And in fact, more than this, I want to prove that here I can put the correct distribution. It is a product of mu of G. Okay. So I use a notation mu of j is the sum of mu of k, j of k. Okay. Okay. So this is just a definition of independence, if you want, and the fact that the law of each marginal is mu. And how do we prove that? Well, of course, we prove that by induction on P. And so I'm going to rewrite this expectation in the following way. I'm going to sum over all possible values of the indices, U1, U0, U1, UP. So this will be little U0, little U1, little UP. I will have the expectation of the indicator function that capital U0 is equal to U0, capital U1 is equal to U1, capital UP is equal to UP. Okay. Well, in fact, here, you see, because my vertices are listed in lexicographical order, I need only consider also little u's which are ordered in lexicographical ordering. Okay. Because otherwise, well, the indicator will always be 0. Okay, and then, of course, I replace capital U0 by little U0, etc. And I rewrite the product. And now, well, what is the idea? Actually, it's a bit similar to what I said before. If I look at this product here, but I exclude the last term, okay? So I say, well, this is here trivial. I say that this is measurable with respect to a certain sigma field, which is a sigma field generated by the KV for V strictly less than UP. Okay? Well, that's obvious because my U0, U1, UP minus 1, they are smaller than UP, so, okay. They will be in this sigma field. Something which is maybe a little less obvious is that the same is true for the indicator function, which is here. This is also measurable with respect to this sigma field. Okay. Essentially, well, to know that this event occurs, you need to know the tree before UP, okay? But up to UP. I mean, you need to know if all the, well, for all the vertices which are before UP in lexicographical order, whether they belong or not to the tree. Okay? But this you can find only knowing these variables. Okay, okay, that's a little bit maybe more delicate, but okay, if you think of it for 5 minutes, you will see that it's true. Okay, that you don't need the value v equals UP. Okay, because well, to know that UP is in the tree, you don't need to know the number of children of UP. You need to know the number of children of his parent, okay, or his grandparent and so on, but not the number of children of UP itself. Okay, so you have a strict inequality here. Okay, okay. So what do I say all that? I say all that because now I have all these quantities measurable with respect to this sigma field, and this one is independent, if you want, of the same sigma field by construction. Okay? Okay, so I can use independence. Okay? I can say that this expectation of this term here times this one is a product of the expectations. Okay? Okay? So I have no, okay. I can write that this is the sum of all U0 less than U1 less than UP. The expected value of the first term, which I do not write, of course, and the expected value of the second term, which is just expected value of GP of KUP. But here, UP is deterministic, okay? So it's just K at the deterministic index. This has low mu. So this is the same as mu of GP. And now I come back, if you want, if I put the sum inside the expectation, I sum over all these indicator functions, I will recover the same product as before, but without the last term. I will recover expected value of G0 of KU0, etc., gp minus 1 of k up minus 1. Okay? It's just the same transformation I did here to go from this line to this line, except that I have one less term in it. Okay, so now you see that what you have obtained, in fact, is the fact that the expectation of this product is equal to expectation of the same product without the last term times mu of gp. Okay? So if you continue by induction, you throw this formula. Okay? Then induction. Okay. Okay. So it's okay. So this gives you this property, and this completes the proof of the theorem. Okay. So you see, it's okay. It's not very difficult if you look at it. But there is something to say because of this story that the indices here are random. Okay. It's a little bit similar to what you do when you consider random processes at a stopping time or at a random time, and okay, you have to be careful. Okay, so that's all for the proof. No question about that? So there are many nice consequences of this theorem, so I will immediately state one of these consequences. Okay, so this theorem stops here. So here is a corollary. So the total progeny so the total progeny is what I call the cardinality of theta, which is the same as theta plus 1. So it's this quantity. Well, it's the number of terms in the final index, if you want, of the Lukasiewicz path, has the same distribution. Okay, so of the mu Galton-Watson tree has the same law as the heating time of -1 by a random walk with jump distribution nu started at 0. Okay? So this is completely immediate because if you just saying that this capital T must, well, by definition of the Lukasiewicz path, this capital T is the same as the cardinality of the number of vertices of the tree. Okay? So just saying that the capital T you find here, which is the number of vertices of the tree, is the same as the heating time of -1 by the random walk. Okay? So I should have mentioned that remark. Of course, the mean of nu is less than or equal to 0. So your random walk has a non-negative mean. This is because nu is just mu shifted by -1. And the mean of mu is less than 1, so the mean of nu is less than 0. And this, of course, ensures that the random walk hits -1. Okay, it's important. Well, in fact, you can, if you do it properly, you can also deduce the fact that the random walk hits -1 from the theorem, which is there. It's equivalent. Okay, so this corollary is an immediate consequence of the theorem. It's something which is a priori not at all trivial, and in fact, just a little bit of history of mathematics. There is a paper by Dwas, but maybe 40 years ago, something like that, who proved this independently of the theorem. And what he did, he computed the generating function of the total progeny of the tree, and he computed the generating function of the heating time of -1, and he said, well, miracle, these are the same. So without any explanation, he said, well, they have the same distribution. Okay? But here, you see, you completely avoid any calculation. You prove this, and you get the same result. Okay, okay. Of course, this was, to be fair, this argument is also quite old. I think it goes back to paper of Harris in the 50s or 60s, and so Dwas should have known that, but he didn't know. Okay, so just to finish today, what happens if you take a sequence of trees instead of a single tree? Okay, so suppose you have theta 1, theta 2, theta n, etc. Now a sequence of independent mu Hamilton-Watson trees. Okay, for a number of arguments, it will be more convenient to deal with such a sequence than with a single Hamilton-Watson tree. Okay. So what you can do with these trees, you can also define, say, a height function associated with a sequence, and that's very easy. You can let, so the height function, I prefer to call it now the height process of the sequence, is defined in the following way. So I call it Hn. And what you're going to do, you're going to concatenate, in some sense, the height functions of the individual trees. Okay, so for instance, you start with the height function of the first tree. So it's going to be h theta 1 of n, if n is between 0 and I think it's cardinality of theta 1 minus 1 here. And then you take the height function of the second tree, so it will be h theta 2 of n minus cardinality of theta 2, theta 1. If n is between the cardinal of theta 1 and the cardinal of theta 2, and so on. So for instance, it will be h theta p of n minus cardinality of theta 1 plus cardinality of theta p minus 1, if you have n between cardinality of theta 1 plus cardinality of theta p minus 1 and cardinality of theta 1 plus cardinality of theta p. Okay. So you just concatenate, if you want, the height functions of the successive trees. Another way to say it is that you enumerate all vertices of the sequence, so one tree after another, and in each tree you enumerate the vertices in lexicographical order, and you look at step n at the generation of the vertex you get. Okay. Question? No? There is a mistake here. You may have asked a question. Okay. And here there is another mistake. It should be, yeah, that's correct. Okay. Now it looks better. Okay, I hope it's fine like this way. So just another corollary we can get from this theorem. Corollary. There exists a random walk S so with jump distribution nu such that, well, you can represent this height process here for your infinite sequence now. Well, by a formula which is essentially the same as the formula I had before for the relation between the height function and the Lukasiewicz path. Okay, so Hn will be the cardinality of all j between 0, 1, n minus 1, with the property that Sj is equal to the minimum of Sk for k between j and n. Okay, so you have this nice relation between the random walk, which corresponds, if you want, I will explain to you where the random walk comes from. It corresponds to the Lukasiewicz path and this height process. Okay, so how do you get that? Well, essentially you define to define S, to proof, to define S, you just concatenate the Lukasiewicz path of theta 1, theta 2, etc. So my time is over, so I'm not going to give the precise definition, but just on a picture, okay? So essentially, let's do the picture like this. You start with the Lukasiewicz path of the first tree. Okay, so it gives you, I don't know, something like that. Okay, and you know that it finishes here at -1. Okay, so this will be Luka theta 1. Okay, and now I take the Lukasiewicz path of the second tree, theta 2, and I concatenate it, but be careful, I started from -1 now, so it's shifted by -1. So it's going to do something like this, maybe, up. And now it's going, because I have shifted it, it's going to finish at -2, if you want. Okay. -2, -1. Okay, so this one is the Lukasiewicz path of theta 2. Okay, and then I continue this way. I need too many colors. Okay, maybe I have something like this. I don't know. Maybe up. This will be Luka of theta 3. And each time I shift because I start from the point where I arrived at the previous step. Okay, so for instance, the blue path will start here at -2. Okay, the next one will start at -3 and so on. Okay. Now, what I have done here, each of these colored piece by the theorem is distributed as a random walk, started from 0 and stopped when it hits -1. Okay, but if I do this concatenation, what I get is really a random walk defined for all integers. Okay, it's just, if you want, it's a consequence of the strong Markov property, if you want. Okay, you concatenate on these pieces. Okay, so this will give you what I call the random walk Sn. Okay, okay, so it's really a random walk. Okay, it's just if you start on, you can do it in the other way. If you consider a random walk, you look at the path up to the time when it hits -1. You start from this time, look at the random walk up to until it hits -2, and so on. These pieces are going to be independent and having the same distribution. Okay? Okay? Okay, so this is your random walk, and now you just have to check this formula. But if you think a little bit of this formula, it's the same formula I explained to you before for a single tree. And the point is that if you pick a value of n, say, suppose that n is here, and you look at the indices j that can contribute to this set, that can verify this property, the only indices j that can work, they will be in this interval here. They cannot be before that time here, because before that time, you see that the minimum automatically will be at least this value, and it will be strictly less than Sj. Okay? If you take j somewhere here, it will not work for this n. The only j that may work for this n are those in the yellow interval. Okay? So once you do this remark, this is really a consequence of the formula I had before for a single tree. Okay? Okay. I stop here. So we continue Tuesday. Is that correct? Tuesday afternoon? Do you have any question? No? Okay.